Hello and welcome to episode 14 of Triumph Beyond Trauma. I'm thrilled that you are here and I have a very special episode for you today. It's been busy here at Tactical Yoga Australia. Last week I've participated in a 2-day workshop for first responders that have retired or are transitioning out of service. It was fantastic and I'll be talking a lot more on this program hosted by Beyond the Badge in a few weeks. Of course, like I mentioned last week, I have launch in 2 weeks. So from the 18th to the 25th of June, doors will be open to the First Responder Mental Wellness Method. It is my wholly online program for first responders, veterans, and frontline workers to embrace and improve mental wellness through a number of strategies, including breathwork, mindfulness, and yoga. The beauty of this program is that it is so accessible, so you can do it all in your own time in any location, which is so important to me because I wanted to support our wonderful country cousins where services and facilities are not always readily available. The program is also completely confidential. There's no reporting back to any insurers or anything like that. And if this is something that you would like to be involved in, you can join the waitlist at tacticalyogaaustralia.com/waitlist. In addition to launch week, I have a 3-day tactical mind body mastery. So if you want to dip your toes in for free and see what I'm about before joining the full program, you can absolutely come along and join me for that. To sign up and get the joining information and links, just head over to tacticalyogaaustralia.com/mindbody and I'll send you everything you need to join. Those links will be in the show notes. Now, my guest this week is Andy Fermo. When the dust settled, after 10 years of military service and 2 active tours of duty with the Australian Special Forces, surviving the impact of an improvised explosive device and near-death scenarios, Andy found himself in a dark hole, seeking purpose and carrying baggage that affected everyday life. Diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, over the years he sought to create purpose and meaning based on a lifestyle that is designed around being positive and mindful of his condition. This isn't always the case and it's easy to quickly derail, and at Christmas 2018, a combination of unforeseen circumstances and events saw his mental health deteriorate. It was at this low point, whilst camping and close to being homeless, the idea of invisible injuries was born. Early in his journey to recovery, Andy learned how to navigate and seek out support services. Now was the time to enact his self-care plan, accessing support systems, and doing the work to get back on his feet. Now, Andy shares his lived experience and those of his peers so he can better the mental health and well-being of veterans, first responders, and their immediate support experiencing PTSD. Through hosting the Invisible Injuries podcast, holistic self-care ideas, connecting support services to the user, and creating an all-in-one online resource. Andy has guested on many podcasts and public speaking events, also being published in Stories of Hope, and is an active member of the community, volunteering his time with numerous ex-services organisations. Andy is wonderful and I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation with him. Of course, with most of the episodes on Triumph Beyond Trauma, we will be discussing content that may be uncomfortable to listen to. So this one comes with a strong content warning as we do discuss Andy's deployments to Afghanistan. Like I said, I really enjoyed this conversation with Andy and I hope that you do too. Please check out all the wonderful things that he's up to afterwards, with his links being in the show notes. Welcome to Triumph Beyond Trauma, the podcast that explores journeys of resilience and hope. I'm Rosie Skeen, a yoga and breathwork teacher and founder of Tactical Yoga Australia. As a former soldier's wife, mum to 3 beautiful kids and a medically retired New South Wales police officer with PTSD, I understand the challenges of navigating mental health in the first responder and veteran community. Join us for incredible stories from individuals who've confronted the depths of mental illness and discovered their path to happiness and purpose, as well as solo episodes and expert discussions. Together, we'll uncover the tools to help you navigate your journey toward a brighter, more fulfilling life. Whether you're looking for helpful insights, practical tips, or just a friendly reminder that you're not alone, Triumph Beyond Trauma has got your back. You matter, and your journey to a happier, more meaningful life starts right here. Welcome to the podcast, Andy. I'm so grateful that you could join me today.
Thanks for having me as a guest, Rosie. I appreciate the opportunity to come on and have a chat with you.
You're so welcome. I've actually wanted to get you on for a while, so I'm thrilled that you're here. Usually, I get my guests to tell us a little bit about their experience, and I know that you're in
Mm.
Australian Defence Force. So, would you like to talk about what led you in that direction?
Yeah, great question. What led me in that direction is that, look, when I finished school, I really didn't have the best idea about what I wanted to do. I was like in a bit of party mode and not really focused on education at the time. And I'd done cadets, right? But I didn't want to conform to the rules at that sort of time because I was sort of partying quite a lot and living that sort of lifestyle. And it got to a point there where I was like sort of having too much fun, let's say, without getting into too much detail. And there was kind of like it was a bit of similar to like an intervention, so to speak, because I was going down a path that probably isn't sustainable or good for the long run. So I had to make a choice, and my brother had joined the military and he joined full time. He was part time, and he's my younger brother, and I'd inspired him to join. You know what I mean? So I kind of
Yeah.
did reversed. But when I signed up, I'd been trying a few different things, and I thought from an Asian background, my oldies were like, oh, either become an engineer or a bloody dentist or a doctor or something like that, and I'm like, I am none of those. I am none of those types of people, right? And so I thought, well, if I can have some sort of skill and I wanted to join the military, I signed up as a choco or a reservist just to dip my foot in the water, and I signed up for IT. So I'm like, oh, please the oldies, I'm going to join the military. I'll do some cool stuff, but I'm also going to get this skill. As a geek is what the nickname for the trade. And when I got to Kapuka and my head sort of come right and I really focused, I really liked the lifestyle, even though they beasted us quite a lot. And there's a process of moving you from being a civilian into a military or a first responder person, transforming you to be in the system.
Yeah, yeah.
I really enjoyed that process, and as I gained more confidence and our teammates, we formed bonds and learned some really cool stuff. That's what I had joined that was inspiring me for the military in the first place. So I actually liked that routine, and I was ready to be able to have that sort of discipline and I suppose a set schedule and all those sort of things. And so I joined up as a full time. I was there, and instead of being a choco, I was like, what? It's just actually me making my own decisions, and I'm not going to do it for anyone else or make to sort of appease anyone. I go, well, look, I'm in now, and this is going to be my path. And I signed up still within Signals Corps, but then I signed up and said to the instructor, one of our instructors, our section leader. And he goes, oh, well, you want to change in. Do you know what job do you want to do? I said, look, I really like, I want to be able to shoot guns, but maybe infantry is not for me. I still want to learn a trade. I want a good mix. And he
Yeah.
goes, oh, why don't you become a bear? And I said, what's a bear? And he goes, oh, well, it's all called actually electronic warfare. You get a top secret clearance. And I went, oh, that's me. So you
Yeah.
get the top secret clearance. It's like being a
Oh,
spy and all this sort of stuff, all these buzzwords. And I was sold, and I didn't even really know what the job was until I'd done some research on it. But I actually like that side of things anyway. I had an electronics background, but with audio. But I like the sneaky peeky stuff. So I like that sort of bit of tech, but also just being on my hands-on bloke as well. So that sort of rounded off my interests in being able to join. So that was me into the force.
yeah, right. That's cool. I like that little sneaky peeky. So when you finished up at Kapuka, and then where is your training?
Yeah, it's at Wagga Wagga.
Wagga.
It's at
Oh,
Wagga
okay.
Wagga.
Well,
Yes, yeah.
so
And then
how?
so the recruit training's at Wagga,
Yeah.
but then for my particular role, they send you to the School of SIGs, which is in Melbourne.
Oh, Melbourne, right. Oh,
And
yeah.
then and so by that time they have a concurrent thing going on. I had to switch over, so all that paperwork, but also all your stuff for your vetting and your clearance is starting to go through. So that process at that time, because of the political landscape and what was going on, took a bit longer than and what was how long it'd usually take. So it took I think 12 months before we could get the clearances to go through. So we did our training in Melbourne, did the basic thing to be the base employment signaller. So this is not even in our trade. How do I operate a radio and do that basic stuff? And then they shipped us up to Kabala, which is a place in Queensland, just north of Toowoomba. So it's inland, and that's where that base is, and it's tri-service where we learnt our skills. But there's two components to it. There's like a unclassified section where you learn the basics, and then there's the classified when once your clearance comes through. So got a couple of goalposts and checks to go through, checkpoints before even finishing the trade.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I know it can be a bit of an arduous process getting to your trade. My husband was in defence and my sister as well. And I know that their training was actually quite a long time before they even get to do the role. So did you find it frustrating that it takes so long, or were you happy just with the process as it was going along?
Look, I think it's just the hurry up and wait once you're finishing the other components. So what we'd finished the unclassified phase, and then they had to send us home for a month while we was finishing up the waiting for the vetting to go through. So that's the thing. But I'm not going to complain. So I was from Perth, and I was in Queensland. So that was really one of the first opportunities to go home for any sort of lengthy point in time since enlisting. And then that was good to be able to go in and be able to catch up with everyone and sort of see how much, I suppose, I'd had growth from the sphere that I was in. I loved my mates, and I think the thing about all of us at that time, when we talk about it in hindsight now, is we were great for each other, but we were also a little bit destructive in terms of our personalities. So when I came home after that first amount, I was like, okay, actually, no, this is where my priority is. And then that frustration sort of soon went. And then I went back and we were ready to do the classified phase, which was great.
And how old were you at this time when you joined?
I was in my early 20s.
Yeah.
So I could have joined up from when I was 17. But I just didn't have, to be honest with you, if I look at it in hindsight now, I just probably didn't have the emotional maturity to be going into an organization like that. But once I did, and I was in my early 20s, it was like, hammer and tongs. I knew what I wanted, I knew what I didn't want more so. And so I gravitated towards doing that single man's game. And I loved the lifestyle.
Yeah.
It was great. Job and the friends and all that.
It is good for the single man.
Yeah, yes, it is.
Especially in that age group. So you were just north of Toowoomba. And how long were you in that role for?
I was for 4 years. So the training school for EW is tri-service, but once you actually graduate, the field role in the army role is based, and the tactical army role is based on the same base in Kabala. So I got posted to their manpack role. That's where when I earlier in our conversation said, well, manpack, going bush, carrying the heavy stuff and shooting guns, that's where the capability was for what floated my boat. Yeah. Because they also had started up some new collaborative effort with some of the infantry battalions, in particular, like down in Sydney, where we were started doing the training for jumping out of the planes and all the other sort of fun stuff and working with them. So, and that was the first time that sort of capability they'd started building up that type of, what they call it, a manpack capability, where we would be attached to a main body, so like the infantry, so to speak, and they'd have a specialist team come in as an attachment, and then we would be under their command, but we'd still have a side subordinate to another master, so to speak. So it was really good.
Yeah, right. So for those of us who aren't fully aware of all the little nooks and crannies of the Defence Force, what did you do in that job role?
Yep, great. So if I could think about that in first responder police speak, right? What it was intelligence gathering, or signals intelligence gathering. So what we would do was intercept enemy communications right? And we would make a picture of the audio sort of landscape, and then we'd have specialist gear to be able to triangulate where they were, and then go in. So let's just say now, and this is I'm just trying to have it so that people might have a point of reference of what it might be. Is that show? What's the one where they're chasing the cops in Melbourne and they got all the people that it's a show. I had a mental blank. Anyway, so they have a whole bunch of assets that come in, and they have all these pretend escapees go out, and then so they'll have their devices, and then they'll chase them down, they'll triangulate and go in.
Yeah, I know the show.
Right, so
yeah.
Yeah, that would be a very similar thing now, without getting into too much operational security details.
Yeah.
But that was what it was. It was getting a tactical soundscape, but not soundscape. No, that's the DJ coming out of me. A tactical intelligence picture, and then we'd offer it to hire for them to be able to make a best decision to then move the chess pieces on the board. That's what the job was.
Nice. Thanks for explaining that. That's good. That helps us understand what you're up to. And it does sound like a bit of fun.
Yeah, it was pretty fun. It was a bit of sneaky peeky, and you got to do some stuff. So I got to work, you get to work with the recon and the snipers and some of the other agencies. So in say first responder speak from the cops, you'd be probably doing some groundwork on something that's happening. Then you offer it up to get a little bit of an intelligence picture, push it up to hire like a organization like a TRG or something like that, where they might be coming in to bang in the doors, and then you'll go in and then do the job. So that's similar to what we were doing, but in a military role.
So did you stay in that role, or did you move on and find other cool stuff to do?
No, the cool stuff, it was all about the cool stuff and what was going on. So at that point in time, we Iraq was just waning as well. You had a few peacekeeping roles as well, like the Solomon Islands. There was Timor that was going on, and then Afghanistan as well. It sort of was about to kick off. So it was quite a busy operational landscape, and I got posted to. I was 4 RAR Commando then, which is now 2 Commando, and they were rolled in the Special Forces role. So I went from that really cool sort of stuff, jumping out of the planes with one of the infantry battalions at the time, to then going down there, and they expanded the role because it was Special Forces. I'm like, oh, this is really cool. We were down there for the Melbourne Commonwealth Games.
Yeah.
And then we were working interagency as well. So there was a lot of stuff, all this new stuff that was coming to me, talking about not just a tactical, but a big strategic picture. You've got a big event, domestic counterterrorism. You had working with the first responder communities, as well as doing the military role. That was something that just blew my mind away. And then when we were doing our cool stuff, I'd see the guys jumping out. The boys would be flying in on the choppers, and we were doing what they call full mission profiles, jumping out of the helicopters and banging in all the black. And I was like, wow, this is really cool. I want a piece of that. And so I put in my paperwork under the guidance of my commander at the time, and then started doing the training. So I was kind of like in the box seat, because I was there and getting to meet all these new people. And then, I sort of just made it aware to them as well. Hey, this is what I'm wanting to do. I just signed up for this. And so then that way it's, you're going to have a go at becoming qualified. So they just give tips, and they're always happy to be able to share that valuable information on what I needed to do to go in. And ultimately you have to be self-disciplined to do that. But I signed up and had my shot at doing the barrier test, which I'd passed. And then onto the selection, which I was fortunate enough to be selected. For me at the time though, I retained my trade. So I was what they call dual qualified, Rosie.
Yeah.
The reason for that was, as a new capability posting into the unit in that sort of model as an attachment, we were new. And so we needed to be able to get some street cred, so to speak. And what better way to get street cred than by not riding on the coattails of someone's achievements, but actually going in and going, hey, look, as our own right, our job has the capability to do that within the Signals, which is a squadron within that organisation. There was qualified dudes, and you're like, I want to have a go. And so I did, and retained mine. But the beauty about it was then I could actually hook in and do both roles when
Yeah.
needed. So it was really cool. Like, they're like, okay, well, you've got the skills too, man. If you need to have some training or you want to jump in on a job like you would, like we did in Afghanistan, it's like you're just an extra body that's trained, that they trust and all that. So it was really cool to have both.
And yeah, and you can be utilized, like you said, and have a bit of fun too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So you just
I
mentioned,
like the cross skills.
yeah, absolutely. So you just mentioned Afghanistan. Is that your first deployment?
It was the first overseas deployment.
Yeah.
So I just missed out on like a Timor, just the operational landscape that had happened. There was a couple of details that had come through that I don't really need to talk about at the moment, but missed out on Timor and Afghanistan after that. So the domestic counterterrorism of the Commonwealth Games was considered as a domestic operation. So it was an operation, but not overseas in a warfighting role. That's what happened when we went to my first tour of Afghanistan in 2007. So Com Games, then I did all my commando training, and then basically one of the things was, do you want to go to Timor or do you want to go to Afghanistan? I'm like, nah, I'll go to Afghanistan.
Yeah. So you volunteer to go overseas, do you put your hand up, or do they say we need a certain amount of people to go, who's interested? Like, how does that even work when you get deployed?
Yeah, look, it's a bit of both, because we were in quite a niche capability, and there wasn't that many of us as well. So there was the qualified aspect of it. So I was just newly qualified as a commando, and then they wanted to be able to use that medal in the role. So I was in the box seat, so to speak, to be the team leader for that first role and do the job in Afghanistan for real, because there'd been a bit of a gap between. There was a little bit of gap, not too long, but there was before our rotation was sent over. So yeah, I would always just put my hand up. When you're in that environment, that's what you want to. If I think that anyone that says that, and this is speaking to the partners, oh, they're making me go, but they're making me go, darling. But the thing is, at work, it's like, yeah, no, let's go. But the thing was, I wasn't tied down to any relationship at the time. So I'm like, yeah. I would love nothing more than to get a Guernsey and be able to do the job for real. That's what we signed up for.
Yeah,
It was
I
the
totally,
stars had aligned.
sorry, I totally appreciate what you're saying there, because I talking to my husband and friends of his and my sister and her friends and just the whole community that we're in, that I likened it to doing all your police training but never making an arrest. Like, it's the same sort of
Yes.
desire that you have. Like, you do all this training for this purpose to go out and do what you do actively in a war
Yes.
type situation or a war zone, and then if you to say
Yeah.
no thanks, it's sort of like, what's the point of all that training that I've done? That's what your job role is, and
Yes.
that's what gets you going, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And even thinking about that from a first responder point of view, the actual area of operations is every day when you go out onto the beat, which is, I think, um, speaking to that is a lot more, because you're going out into public every day when you're on duty. That's the that's the battleground, so to speak. So you never know what's going to happen.
No, that's the thing. I've had a few conversations with Defence Force members that think about transitioning, and I'm like, well, it's like going to war every day, but you don't get you do get a little bit of training, but I know before you guys go overseas, there's quite a bit of preparation that you undertake to do that. And you don't get that every day as a cop, unfortunately. You just get out and go and do your job, and that's it.
Yeah, yes,
So
yes.
it is
And
what it
that's the
is.
thing, that's where all that crucial training comes in, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. So do you want to talk about your time in Afghanistan?
Yeah. So I did two tours, and yeah, the first tour was a great eye opener, and we were fortunate at that point in time that there was no like full on casualties. We did have a couple of casualties, but it wasn't a full, someone that has been killed in action or something like. We had some wounded in action, and we had lots of kinetic activity on that first one, lots of gunfighting and battles. But I think because we had returned back at that time as that major force, the enemy the landscape we were still fresh, and they hadn't had a chance to be able to really study the tactics and how a large organization such as the commandos, like heavy hitters, heavily tooled up. The heavy hitter of the special forces command, within, that's the role of the commandos, right? So just to go in and as a heavily tooled unit, they didn't have all those, they hadn't sussed us out yet as much. So we were fortunate in that in my first rotation. But on the second rotation, I went from rotation 4 to rotation 9, and that was only 2007. So 2 years, or within 24 months, the landscape. So there'd be five rotations in between. It was very different, vastly different, and the IED landscape had also increased exponentially. So there was a lot of IED related incidences that had happened. And then also that we'd suffered a few casualties as well in that time from our first rotation, which was rotation 4 through to the rotation 9. There'd been a couple of, killed in action, and those blokes had paid the ultimate sacrifice in the line of duty. So, it was different. And then that's where, when we got to our second tour, we were going out for a month operation, and it was a little bit different as well in terms of, at that time, without going into too much detail, we were invited to go out of area for some other tasking. So it was a large force that had come in to go outside the area. We were in vehicles, so that was another one. So that was the last sort of tour that incorporated a lot of vehicle operations and being mobile, just because of that IED threat had increased so much. Plus there was a lot of other assets that were out there at the time, the helicopters, so then you could bang in on specific jobs. But with that, within that first 10 days of that month-long operation was when I experienced that trauma triangle that I'm calling the trauma triangle. Yeah. So that was like 3 severely traumatic incidences, all IED related, Rosie, in succession. So within a couple of days each other.
Wow.
Yeah. And then so the second, I'll actually speak to that, because I think that I really respect it, and I like to be able to keep the memory alive of the, if that's okay to sort of mention these men, these brave men, and the actions of all the call sign. So of all the, the people that were involved in our commando company group in afterwards. So the first one was when Sergeant Brett Hill, he was disarming a cluster of IEDs on a major highway. And one of them had, because it was such quite a complex task to go in, he was blown up in the line of duty. And again, so I'll speak to all the events where the guys really, all their training kicked in and everyone chipped in, and just the actions of the boys after all these incidences were just second to none. And I think that there should have been more medals that were issued out as part of what they did than what have been, but just acknowledging that now, and their actions to be able to provide security, keep everything safe after all those incidences, as well as eliminate the enemy threat, was really, or neutralize the enemy threat, was a massive one. Yeah. And so Sergeant Brett Hill passed away. A few days later, our Bushmaster armoured vehicle ran over an IED, and so there was mass casualties in that, where a lot of the guys had traumatic brain injury instances that were blown up in the vehicle. Like, if you can just imagine the force of this bomb, big sort of tank type vehicle, blew the engine out, blew the tyres off, and so whoever was inside got shaken around like in the can there. And I was fortunate enough in terms of not to get any traumatic brain injury, because I was manning the rear gun, so I was like standing out of a manhole on a weapon on the Mag 58, and that's where my injuries came in, because I would have been, if I wasn't holding on to the weapon and the manhole, I would have been like a human cannonball and would have been ejected from the vehicle. And then afterwards as well, again, that was all these IED incidences were the trigger for larger enemy activities, like a trap. So you go in and there's a lot of enemy activity, and again, the boys did an amazing job. So that was that incident. And then turning everything around from that traumatic incident. I am glazing over it a little bit. I am mindful of what we spoke about beforehand, so I didn't want to trigger anyone. And then there was that incident, and a few days later, it was a different type of vehicle, but Private Damien Tomlinson, their call sign ran over a roadside bomb. And then again, the boys just did an amazing job, but he lost his legs after that incident. And so what, you know, he's doing amazing stuff now for the community afterwards. But we all sort of had that second lease on life to go in after those incidences. But they were highly traumatic. And then because you're operationally focused, Rosie, we still had a whole tour to complete, and then the rest of the month. So that was 10 days. Within 10 days of a 35-day mission, all happened at the start, at the beginning of the tour. So, you know, it was really hard to be able to, I think the difficulty was, you know, knowing you just have to park it. So I put it in the parking lot way out back there, never to be looked at again. Let's impound that, and then just lock the key and put it away. And then it wasn't until I got back when we could unpack that trauma.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for your service, and to those men that were with you. And yeah, I know at that time, like, there was a lot of stuff happening, and of course, after you say those incidences, like, are like a trigger for more afterwards that we won't talk about. But I can't even imagine how traumatic that must have been for you. But then to have to continue to stay there after you've lost a mate, and, you know, and David going through what he went through. I totally understand what you're saying about parking any feelings or emotions, or probably even thoughts about what's going on and why, because you're there for a specific job role, and you, like you said, you still have to stay there and do that job. So when you come back, how was that, and how long did it take after you came back for some of that stuff to start to hit the surface?
Yeah, great question there, Rosie. Is it all right if I could answer that in a moment? Because I just wanted to speak to that last little bit in regards to parking. I think if we didn't, and that was the first part of the trauma. There was many more traumatic events, but that's more of a cumulative action of you being in war. It is war, but I think if you didn't have the ability to compartmentalize at the time, it would put your team and the call sign and the whole group in danger, or you'd be a liability because you just couldn't focus on what the task was. Even going, I need the support of my family and all this stuff. Operationally speaking, it's very difficult to be able to speak to them about stuff when things are going on overseas. So you compartmentalize it, and there's a reason for it, and then it keeps people alive, keeps you alive, and you can unpack it, which is that segue now to afterwards, where the trauma didn't really start to bubble up because we were so busy. I actually got home when everyone went on leave. I continued on there was some tasking for me that I needed to complete with some other courses, and then also a recruitment drive as well. So I continued working for a number of months after my tour, so I didn't really have a chance to really decompress. But when I finally got on leave, that's life. That's what it was. I signed up to do that. But when I finally got on leave, I clearly remember the day. I was in a furniture shop with my wife. We were cruising around, just having a bit of a look around. And I heard over the radio that there was a helicopter incident, which included 3 killed in action, 3 of the boys that I knew had passed, and then mass casualties again in the helicopter incident. And that was the trigger for me, where all my stored trauma sort of came up, and I'm not afraid to say it now and be vulnerable, as I bawled my eyes out and turned into a bit of a mess and had to leave the building in front of a whole bloody crowded shop. So that was the start of really, sort of where the mental health sort of issues had sort of arisen for me, and that compartment had been unlocked. No. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
yes.
Not real good for you to be in public when you've yeah, when all that sort
Yeah.
of comes out of the parking lot, so to say, and
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
And I just want to sort of mention as well, I use that in context of what happened as the trigger for me. And just hearing about that and not being able to do anything, it was already past because when an incident like that happens, Rosie, as you'd be aware, in that first responder role is that you can't really say anything about the job until, even if it's out on the media, the stuff on news, the actual details don't come out. And when you're in a blackout, it's really hard to be able to do that. So I knew that the incident had already happened. And so there was already some time passed by the time we'd heard it. Not too much time, but, there was all this stuff. So, yeah, that was the start of really unpacking all those traumas.
Can I ask you what year this was that where you first started unpacking your
Yeah.
trauma?
Yeah, it was sort of towards the end of 2009.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
in that time in history, like we didn't talk about this too much. So
Nah.
how did
No,
you
no, no.
how did you navigate that? And did you know what was up? Like, did you know your signs and symptoms, or did you sort of just think maybe you're just upset, obviously, because you've lost people that you know? Or did you
Right.
think it was something a bit deeper?
I knew it was something deeper. You kind of know that there's something deeper going on, but I just didn't want to. One, I didn't want to acknowledge it or even vocalize what was going on because when that sort of happens and I sort of broke down, the first thing then that was, oh, fuck, I don't want to be. I don't want to be perceived as weak that this happened there and I had this incident. Who am I going to tell? When you don't say anything as well during that time because you're so operationally focused, you go, well, I want my next trip. When am I going to go on the next yippee trip and get to do the job again? And that's part of the identity that you're doing it. So you don't really say anything, or even if you're saying stuff to the boys, it's at that superficial level, unless you're really working so intimately where you can have these one-on-one conversations with some of the guys. Say for the dudes that I went with, we were kind of attachments and then we were so busy at that particular point in time, it was really hard to be able to, when we got home, everyone did their own roles again. So it was hard to be able to get everyone who was in that call sign in the same spot at the same time. The guys that were there that we kind of just ignored speaking about it. So for me, it was like, okay, I'm not going to really acknowledge it. I'm going to ignore it. And then I didn't want to say anything because that's what we call career suicide. Mentioning someone, you become a liability. So I actually recognized that and I did two things. So firstly, the first role was to be able to, and I was speaking to this to a psych recently. It's called what did he call this? It coping badly, right? But I'm coping badly, and it's not a sustainable way to be able to cope. But it's a coping mechanism, and that coping mechanism was prescription drugs and bloody the abuse of that, and then also the abuse of alcohol as well. So more increased alcoholism in that way. So if we look at the levels there, it was just increasing. We all know that within those organisations that there is a culture of drinking. I don't know what it's like now, and people can say that there isn't, but there probably still is. But the thing was, for me, it was an increased rate. So, when you can have a base level of going, this is what's normalized anyway, and then you go that's increased and still be functioning, that's the one way to cope, but it's not a way to be able to cope for a prolonged period of time. So, all those little things there, taking stuff to try and go to sleep, to this, trying to adjust things. It just wasn't a way to be able to go. And so I went and sought out some professional help off my own back. So there was a couple of other organisations that was open to doing it. But at the same time, I just didn't want to, at the time, I didn't want to have that leak to go into the unit because I knew that some people were there. So at first, the first port of call after that, I knew that it wasn't really going well with the coping badly, was to go in and seek my own psychiatrist and psychologist and checked in to do a bit of a sort of AA or alcoholics type course and all those little things just to go in. So at least then for me, it was like I need to get my head on paper, but then also it was like a paper trail to say, hey, look, he's actually sorted out some stuff if it ever sort of came in along these lines. And that all came out at the wash later on. I sort of sorted my head out. But as I mentioned earlier on, I had a top secret clearance and you have to be vetted annually. And for me, and this is my opinion, so I don't want a thing with the process there, or I'm not. This was my experience, and that is that there's stuff that I divulged as part of my vetting process that I thought would be a little bit more in confidence, but the people that actually conduct these tests only see what's on paper. And so that was my experience. And then so shared some stuff, thought, okay, nothing yet. If I share this stuff here, my head's right, I'll be able to then just continue on, because no one will be able to subvert, in the job I was in, no one would be able to subvert me into giving up secrets, because I already told what had happened, right? No, that wasn't the case. And without going too far or too politically into that my experience was when I was a bit too honest with what was going on, and where the demise was that kind of like put up some flags. And then when I lost the clearance, I was on my way I was going overseas for some training for a specific capability. And it's like, no, Fermo, you're not going anymore. And I said, what's going on? And they said, you've lost your clearance. So when that all unhappened, and that was the unraveling of all this other stuff that you tried to sort of keep under tabs, it just makes it bigger than Ben-Hur, because what it looks like is you've been hiding, but what you're doing is you're not reporting that to your subordinates, so then that way you're not perceived as weak. Whether that double-edged sword is that I shot myself in the foot by doing that, but they're the decisions that I made at the time, and I stand by them to be able to continue on the role that I'd love doing. And that was the thing, so but I think, looking back in hindsight now, and after all this work with the wellness, things happen for a reason. But that was the unraveling of everything there, Rosie.
Yeah. And I think at that time, if someone would have said to you, this is all happening for a reason, you probably would have told them to get fucked, because
I would have told him yes. I would have given the big finger and said, what the hell are you going on about? Because it's just. When you think of it from the hindsight, and all the other training and learnings that we've done, especially in the wellness space, you think that's a lot of growth.
Yeah, 100%. That's a lot of growth. And like, I can even imagine at the time with you navigating your mental health by yourself, because I don't care what people say, it can be career suicide to speak up and say you have got an issue, like you're going to get sidelined, and that eventually, in a different sort of way, that's what happened to you. But by doing that, they take away that identity as well, and then it sort of snowballs from there, doesn't it? Like your mental health deteriorates more because you can't do what you want to do, but you still need to get help. And there's just so much going on, and none of it's really conducive to being mentally well.
No, it's not. So, once that all came out of the wash and lost the clearance, I couldn't actually perform my role in any sort of capacity, even though it's like I went from hero to zero in a really short period, like in 5 minutes, basically.
Yeah.
And then so as I couldn't do my role, I was like, well, I'm still capable. But the thing is, because the whole administrative process hadn't been given its due process, I was sidelined and put into like what was essentially a different section where I was dealing. It was like, and those guys do a great job, but I was put from my job into the Q store at the back, issuing phones out to people. So people were like, what the fuck's going on, Andy? And you go, well, look, there's some stuff that's going on, and you don't want to divulge everything out there, otherwise people are talking. Because you secretly in hope you want the situation to get better, even though that it's actually going to get worse, which is one part of it. Not being able to explain that situation is another. So there's the isolation. And then thirdly, once that sort of happens and the cat goes out of the bag that you can't do the role, then they can't talk about any operational stuff, even though what's happening anyway. So they kind of like turn their back to you. But it is on purpose, but it's not on purpose. It's just that's operational security and how it's got to be. But that doesn't mean that I didn't feel isolated or alone, because I was in a section there where the guys were sort of empathetic a little bit, but still, I couldn't really divulge any information because their clearance wasn't up to a certain level. So you can't even talk about it with anyone. It's just, this guy's just rocked up. Just give him some stuff to do for the wheels to be in motion for that while they're lost. Right. So that was the whole thing. So there's the isolation. You're trying to deal with your own, this is just actually the work stuff.
Yeah.
Then I'm like having to deal with, what am I going to do? All these questions. This is my identity. And what makes it worse is when you're ejected from what you see before your time. So I was thinking, okay, probably I've got another 5 years left in me. Probably could have even been 10 in hindsight. I never know. I never got to walk that path. But it would have been at least another 5 where I'm like, okay, I need to set myself up to be able to do these courses to get out. Then I can set myself up for when I separate from the organization, I'm doing it on my terms. And when that's brought forward, and you go, well, actually, I didn't have any of those things in place. It's the coulda, but didn't. So that thing really played on what I was going to do, because I was not ready mentally or emotionally or physically to be able to go into another role to be effective in any way for a prolonged period of time. So
It's a lot, isn't it?
that was a difficult, yeah.
Yeah.
And people would find that, I found that was really difficult. That made things actually even harder, like you mentioned before, because there's so much going on. And then, there's have you done these claims? Or there's the claims process, and then seeing medical people, and then seeing the supports with all that. And when you're going through those motions, you don't want to acknowledge that it's actually happening, but you have to, because that's part of the discharge process, that you have to go and do all these things. So you're kind of secretly hoping that this has happened. And then once I got out on that last day, I'm like, oh, what the hell is to go? So even like I was still doing, I was fortunate enough to go into a job straight away, straight out of the army, but I was so highly strung and I was in what we call avoidance mode. So I was avoiding having to set anything up. Like all this terrible stuff had just happened to me, and I just didn't want to have a bar of it. So, and I was angry, and that was a lot of it was anger. A lot of it was built up, and so that was a bit destructive as well. And then so I was still doing these things in the hope secretly. I'd be doing PT. I'd wake up early, do PT, and then I'd do like, this is when the boys are doing this, and maybe I might get a call and say, we need you. And the call never came. That's the secret hope. That's the secret hope. Oh, maybe I'll get a Guernsey on. They'll need someone else. And unfortunately for me is that, look, because the way that I was discharged, I didn't get medical. It was turned around as a medical discharge afterwards. On the grounds, for my particular situation. But at the time, it's like, well, you're getting out here, so I couldn't even sign up as a reservist or looking to go into any of the other streams. Say, for example, the guys get out of the military and they'll join an emergency services, first responder services. A lot of them do that. A lot of that's a natural progression. Post-military service, all those doors were closed. Yeah. I was going down that tunnel. There was no lights in the tunnel. I was just kind of like a dim light maybe somewhere else. So I was kind of bumbling around trying to get my shit in order, basically, Rosie.
Yeah. You mentioned before when you had your first triggering event that you're with your wife. So
yes,
you had a wife by that stage. Did you have children?
Oh no! Well, she's my. I'll call her my. She was girlfriend at the time.
Girlfriend, yeah, but now
so
wife.
So I actually just proposed to her. So we were planning our wedding. Yeah. So no children at the time, but we had some other stuff that was sort of planning. And I was going through all these other things, and she was just a great support for me. But she had her own career as well. She's a very independent person as well. That's what I love about her. And so, as someone was there, she was like, oh, what the fuck's going on with this dude? But she stood by me and really sort of was pivotal in when I started seeing all the specialists for my own care, and they said, bring your wife in. She was actually quite open to being able to be part of that process. Yeah, good. And in that support role. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing that you had that support, where, defense was lacking really, and still are,
Yeah.
but we won't get into that.
No,
Um,
no.
I could be here all day. So how did you navigate that? Because that would have been a real tough time, like losing that identity. And then, you said that you had a job to go into, but was it something that you actually really wanted to do, or you just had to pay the bills at that time? So
A bit of both. So I'd had to pay the bills, and Sydney's expensive. So we were living in the inner ring of Sydney, close to the city,
yeah.
a place called Lilyfield, and it was
Right.
busy. But Sydney's an expensive, even in 2009, 2010, it was inexpensive to be living in a townhouse. And when you're in the military, there's certain perks, like, either if you're in a de facto relationship, you can have like rental assistance, different posting bits. So there's all the little perks that you get, and once you're out, those perks aren't there anymore, and it was really expensive to live. So one was that sort of survival mode, but at the same time, my interest was in self-taught cook, and I thought, oh, Master Chef had just started. I thought, oh, how hard could this be? I've got a couple of really great mates that are head chefs now. How hard could this bloody thing be? And so I went and signed, found several 3 chef hat restaurants. I'm like, well, I'm still 10 foot tall in my head at the time. I'm like, oh fuck, I'm gonna. Why would I just want to get an apprenticeship at the pub when I could go high level? I'm watching MasterChef. How hard could this be? So I was just like, I'll go to the 3 chef hat restaurants, and I went to 3 different ones, and I got called in for trials on all of them, and all of them called me back, and it was just basically the first one that called me back was the first one. And the beauty about what they saw was, you know, the boys give me shit about that. They go, "This is Casey Ryback, the chef from." It was a really old movie with Steven Seagal in it. And anyway, he's this chef, right? It was this former special forces guy. So I'm like, okay, well, I'll get this apprenticeship, and I was a mature age apprentice. So basically, they saw that there was a skill there. I was a team leader. I had the skills there, and I wasn't going to be like some 17-year-old kid being the yes man. Like, I had my own mind, and I could make decisions about certain bits and bobs. And so they took advantage of that straight away. Mature age apprenticeship does not pay much, Rosie. It really doesn't. So I was just working more hours to try and get by with the pittance that I was earning. It was a big shift. And I found it, in terms of, it was a big punch and hurt to the ego, which made things even worse, because when you're in that sort of organisation, you do get a bit of a bigger ego. And it's not just in a bad way, but you're at this higher, operating at a different level. When I got brought down and chopped down into this thing, I'm like, "Fuck, this is the real world now," and people are going through this, and so I'd actually just divulged into that. That was avoidance. So because I needed to make more money because there was not much pay.
Yeah.
I was just working myself to the ground, and it got to this point where I wasn't sleeping anyway, so I was really only getting maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours maximum, and then putting my hand up to work 6 days a week, even sometimes a seventh. And then so trying to be with my fiance at the time, trying to plan a wedding and going through all that mental health stuff, it was like I was just sending myself into oblivion from that sort of state with work, to try not to think about anything. And at the same time, and I've not really shared this much at all, Rosie, is, because I still had that sort of sense of civic duty. I'll use the analogy, right? Yeah, if you're in the fire brigade, and sometimes there's the guys that will light up the bloody fire so then they could go and put the fire out. So I was riding home from the city, and because Sydney, on George Street or Pitt Street, when I'd be riding home from the restaurant, and this is maybe at 2, 3 in the morning, before I'd have to sort of get a couple of hours kept to go back in and start doing the early shift. At that point in time, there's still quite a fair bit of violence on the streets. So sometimes I just go in there and be minding, because I was just angry all the time. I just wanted to sort of pick a fight. But what I'd do is I'd kind of like entice whatever something was happening in a fight, and it's pick it a little bit so that when it had happened, I could just jump in and help the person that was, So I'm like, this is not really, it's coping badly again,
Yeah.
Rosie.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, here's my civic duty, and he's going to come in and but because I just wanted to punch
Punch
on.
on. Yeah.
But the thing was, it wasn't really a smart move because I didn't have the boy, like there's the buddy system in the military where you got your backup, as a cop, you'd have your backup. It'd be silly to go in on your own. But because I wasn't in the best mental state at the time and just trying to find and fill a void, that for me was, you know, coping silly. Again, it was like we'd finish shift and then instead of going home, I'd be wanting to get to know these crew. And then there was this sort of culture of alcoholism as well. You'd go out and get a few drinks in and do that sort of thing. And so that wasn't conducive to what I was doing. So I'd be going home sort of kind of half cut. Yeah. And that's more enticing to sort of poke the bear a little bit. And so that's what happened to me until I actually went and sought help. And then it got to that point where Claire was like, mate, I'm seeing you, you're present, but you're not present. So she was trying to make all these nice, it was like going out on a first date every single time we'd get the time to catch up.
Yeah.
And I was present, but I wasn't present because I was so tired or I was angry. So I was like kind of walking on eggshells for her. And she's like, mate, so I was so close to finishing the apprenticeship, but I was like, you know what, I've got to just make a decision now. Thanks for the opportunity, but this isn't for me right now. And it was around about that point there where I'd actually gone in and sought out a little bit more help, acknowledged that something wasn't right, the coping badly wasn't working, and I don't want to have an intervention like I had. I didn't want to have one of those experiences. So I'm like, you know what? I sought out a advocate or someone that could help me with my claims and all that sort of thing, and they really sort of I was awoken up to some truths. He didn't suffer fools, and he was like, mate, you just need to pull your head out of your ass. This is what's happening. And it was a bit of tough love for me at the time. If you're talking about some mental health stuff, sometimes there is really that scope to, hey, snap out of it, mate. And so that was where I was. And, after that point, that's the snap out of it. Okay, well, now I can actually guide you in a normal way, but he just needed to put the hammer and tongue onto me. His name was David Christie, and a really great bloke, and he taught me to navigate my way through that. So, as much as it was that you mentioned before, trying to get these systems in place to earn some money, and it's out of necessity, he helped put the systems in place that at least there was some sort of safety net underneath. In the process of the military process, it'd be kind of like a bit of a compo claim where there was a partial acceptance of the claim, where then that way it enabled you to have some sort of safety net while I got my head sorted out. So that's what it was. They called it an interim sort of part of that claim where I didn't need to worry as much on the financial bit while the process was to be able to get my head straight. And he said, we need to get your head straight first. If you can't think properly or you can't do anything, you can't move forward at all. So that was, fortunately for me, that sort of start to be able to do some really big changes and go into that really intense part of the mental health journey and growth, post-traumatic, work.
Yeah, it's a lot of work, isn't it?
Huge. Yeah, massive.
It's a lot of work. And I used to say to people, like, when I left about 2017, 2018, there's a lot of cops that would say, not to your face directly, but in the locker room, they're just after the money, or like whatever they would say, they just want to pay out, blah, blah, blah. They want to get out easy. Like, if you wanted to get out easy, you would not go through this fucking process. Like, if you weren't crazy before, the process would send you that way, because it is brutal. And I know, there's eyes all over defense at the moment and their processes and procedures and how they do things. But for you back then, like, I can imagine it would have been quite similar to go through that whole journey and the process of discharge and navigating your mental health as well. So I can really appreciate where you're coming from there. So when did you start to notice a little bit of post-traumatic growth, and how did that look for you?
Well, that took a long time before there was any sort of growth at all, really. It was just trying to get my head in order. So like a lot of that work was the exposure therapy, the CBT, yeah, the CBT training, the exposure training, all that stuff there. You name it, I did it.
Yeah.
So I was kind of, I did it both ways, where I went to an organization. It was called VVCS at the time,
Yeah.
Vietnam Veterans and Family Service, right? VVCS. But now it's called Open Arms. And so they had like a counseling service, which was open to the veteran and the family. And then there was also the specialist help, which was the treating psychiatrist. And so I had both. So I was going in for the psychiatrist work, and then in between those specialist appointments, I was seeing like the counselor, who was also a qualified psychologist, just to be able to unpack a lot of stuff. And so at that time, because there hadn't been as many sort of since the Vietnam era, there was stuff that was coming out from Timor and more so either Iraq or Afghanistan, because that was still early in the piece. That was early part of that 20 years that they were there for. That process was still a bit convoluted, you know what I mean? And then a lot of the treatment as well was still at that, it was moving on from that Vietnam era of how they would try and treat people for mental health, and in particular PTSD. So they wanted to try some different bits, and I'm like, yeah, cool, I'll just do the work. So I had a crack at everything. And then that sort of also brought my wife in, which was lucky, because then she could support me. And yeah, she didn't have to, and she was my fiance at the time, but she did, and she's hung out with me ever since. Lucky me. Yeah, so I think I had to do a lot of work with the exposure therapy before I even started to see some sort of growth, and it's still a continual process now. I think that shift in the mindset, besides trying to deal with all those jumbled thoughts, there's one is learning to deal with the jumbled thoughts and put them in some sort of order, but then also finding ways to be able to then have a coping mechanisms and tools that would come down. So that's a big process there. And that runs concurrently with also you trying to connect with a specialist, right? So there's a lot of people that, I fucking tried this once, mate. I didn't connect. So therefore all of them must be shit.
Yeah,
That's the thing. And that's it. So my guy said, man, you know what, I don't like to say this, but I'm going to say it, because if you have to go doctor shopping and find out of the way, but not doctor shopping for scripts, he goes, mate, you got to keep going till you find what sticks. So even if there's someone where you can have a remote connection to be able to be at least a little bit more open, because they put you at ease straight within a couple of sessions, not just one, give it several, even 3 or 4 or something like that. And if it doesn't work, then move on to the same guy, to a new person, because then that way you're finding someone that connects with you, and that's the whole thing now. So that was a process in itself. Once that sort of happened, I'm like, okay, well, now I've got a capacity to at least make some semi-better decisions. But then I'm not like going to still go in and go into work, because that was my thing, is like, a bit of a workaholic. This is me. If I'm not working, what is there? And I suppose that comes down to our society as well in Australia, like the Western culture is like, if you're not working, then what are you doing? You must be bludgeoned. But the thing is, the work, which my advocate and all the specialists say, the work here for you at the moment, Andy, is you.
Yeah.
But you need to work on you before you can help anyone else. It's putting the bloody mask on in the plane before helping anyone else. The same rings true. So it's like, so this is work, because if you don't sort this out now, there's going to be issues in you moving forward, because you're just trying to just cover it up besides dealing with it. So I was taught quite early to be able to do that, and it doesn't make the work any easier. But that work was fucking hard, man. Like, it really is. So when I started to do that work, the first point, which is going to really answer your question there, Rosie, was where did I see the growth? The first point in the growth was when I spoke to my wife, and I was doing a lot of exposure therapy. And one of the tools that my psychiatrist and the counsellor had sort of given me was this thing called floating leaf, where this idea of all the jumbled minds is like, let's have you visualize these ideas, and take one of them, pluck them out, and then imagine that's on a leaf on a river, and then it's floating away. So then that way you can make heads or tail of what's going on in that storm, right? You pluck it, even though they're not in order, it's just putting them and letting the idea or thought float away. We could deal with it, but it's one at a time. I told my wife about this, and she said we'd moved out to the Central Coast from Sydney, which is just an hour out of town, but it had this beautiful waterways right near the Hawkesbury River. And I told my wife about it, and she's like, "Well, you can't surf because your shoulders are fucked. Maybe I'll do this." And so she sits me out at the front and said, "Wait out the front here." I'm like, "What's going on?" And then I'd wanted to get back into paddle, like into surfing, but my shoulders were bunged. So she listened to this and went, "Oh, okay, well, maybe we'll just try this paddle boarding thing that you've also mentioned." And so a guy rocked up with a trailer and a paddle board and delivered it and said, "There you go, mate, there's your floating leaf." So that was part of the reason why I'm so into the paddle boarding, because then I could take my thoughts, I could be on the water, and then I could be paddling in, and that was my sort of quiet time with nature. And so that was the first time I actually really experienced some sort of growth in being able to share something that was going on and then have that and implement, okay, this is cool. I made paddling a regular thing, especially in those early days, because it was, for me, it was like getting those jumbled thoughts in and then going in and sorting out my shit that way as well when I wasn't at the specialist.
Yeah, I love paddleboarding. I got one too. It's so good.
Yeah.
It's just,
Oh,
it
it's
is
so
that,
good.
oh, it's that connection with nature too, and especially if you're by yourself and you do it, you just take your time and float down the creek or the river wherever you're at. Yeah.
Nothing's better. And so that was the whole thing, you know. I was paddling on this waterway, and you know where the waterway was, it was a beautiful area, but sometimes you're not privy to where all those really posh people are with the big ass houses until you paddle past them slowly and then see what else, all the other, and I'm like, you know, a little bit sticky beaky and inquisitive by nature. So I'm like, I'm gonna paddle slowly by here and check out that house. Wow, that's really cool. And so it was really great to be able to get to know the area and also have those thoughts in, you know, once I could actually get out of my head and enjoy that serenity of paddling. It was amazing. And that was that first part of the growth.
Sounds like a mindfulness practice, if I want to put a name on it, like just being with yourself and just noticing what's going past as you paddle.
Yep. Yeah, it is an absolute mindfulness practice. It's like, yeah, just accept the thought. It's not going to define you. It'll pass, and then just, you know, being mindful that thought's there, and then whoop, that it's gone.
Yeah. So from the Central Coast, like I know you've moved around a bit and you're in Noosa for a while.
So once like the reason why as well we'd moved around a bit is I kind of saw it like I suppose a bit like the military posting cycle. Where, you know, I grew up as a mining kid too, so, you know, we'd move every couple of years, so it wasn't anything new to pick up, and it wasn't from you running away from anything. It's like that's just what you did. But I think for me, these things happen for a reason. Like to say that now, it's like, oh, we need to move to the sunshine, like Central Coast, and then to Noosa. These ideas came in, and they were really strong ideas. It's like, okay, this where we are now isn't working for us, but it's like this calling that needs to be there. We need to be here now for whatever reason that I can't explain. That was that gut feeling that came in. But the reason why we'd moved to those from the big smoke in Sydney to say the Central Coast to Noosa was that they were still highly desirable, or they were great beach location. You're in Coffs, right? So you know that sort of beach lifestyle, and it is a lifestyle, but it's a highly populated regional town. So there's still amenities, there's services, and it's not quite as big as a city, but there's still some hustle and bustle to an extent. So that's what we really loved about doing this, is that when we're on the Central Coast, I could get into town for all appointments. We still had that nature, but we were still into the big smoke. My wife was in corporate at the time, still, until she was pregnant with our first kid. So that worked well there. And then when we had our second, we were away from immediate support, and Claire's mum was up in Brizzy, so we're like, well, we checked it out several times, checked out the Gold Coast, that was super expensive, and we're like, you know what, three different friends said, why don't you consider Noosa? And we went up there and we're like, oh, this is like perfect because it has that sort of same element, what we loved about the Central Coast. It had the beach, had the Noosa River, and for my mental health, that was what was needed, but I still could work. So that was and I was in property investment at the time. So I could work from home. I could go and see my specialists. I was in this highly populated regional town that had nature without it being the big smoke. So that for me ticked the boxes where I was in terms of mentally and physically and professionally as well at the time. And it was good to be in those areas, which is totally different to where we are now in the big smoke again. But
Are you in Perth now?
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I'm in Perth now. So that was part of that growth as well, and it was deliberate still to be able to go, exposing myself to a big smoke where there's lots of people and triggers for my PTSD. That's not good, conducive to be in that environment. So I really listened to that training as well. So we set ourselves up for the environment that we're at. But living in highly desirable holiday destinations isn't always the easiest route to go. So either you're a super rich person that can fucking afford to live there without you, that's the retirement plan.
Yeah.
Or if you're in a younger demographic, you kind of got to have several bloody hustles to make ends meet. It's where the culmination of doing several side hustles allows you to live that lifestyle and be there. And I think that there's a lot of young families being able to do that away from the big smoke now. But it is a bit of a hustle, and you've got to be able to do these things. And it's a juggling game between that and keeping the specialist appointments and everything like that going on, as well as having that professional career to sustain you financially. Now, moving to Noosa, I had to go from how can I put it, having all my self-care and specialist process in place to then having nothing. And the thing about the Sunshine Coast was there were services there, but it's got the highest population of veterans and also ex-first responders in that sort of region. It's so highly populated southeast Queensland or northern New South Wales of veterans that the specialists that are available are rarely available to take on new patients. So that's the thing, is that those services are there, but new patients to one service, the aging demographic as well as a new younger contemporary demographic is very difficult. So I found it really hard without any of the tools that I had. My paddleboarding, which was a big growth thing there, but and working out. But in terms of the specialist support, I was like, I'm in a good spot. And that was the worst thing to think about, is that when you're in the good spot and then you just go, I'm all right, I don't need to worry about that fluff anymore. I just did it for what I needed to do. Then the next thing is I was on the railroad, and then the next thing it was derailing fast.
Yeah.
So everything kind of unraveled pretty fast without those specialist care. And I quickly found myself sort of slipping down a mental health sort of slope. Was doing some work to be able to get in, but without that specialist care, moving somewhere new and pushing shit uphill, trying to develop my business again was really difficult. Made it work, but it was really taxing on the mental health, which got to that point where Claire was like, man, Andy's not in a good way, to one of our friends, Shane, who was a veteran as well, and his wife, Angie. And he'd been doing this breathing thing. And the first time I'd heard about this breathing thing, I was so disrespectful of it that I was like, oh, it's all blah, 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 and I was like, well, I think about myself now in my reaction to what he was trying to at least expose me to, that it was so, I just really, I mention it now because I apologize for being so disrespectful to what you were teaching me. I know the value of it now, and it was literally life-changing. So that was the first exposure, but the second one, my wife was like, maybe she'd have another go. So he gives us a call and he said, drive down to the Goldie. We'll meet at my place, but we're going to a place called Mount Warning. So it's on the hinterland between Byron Bay and the Gold Coast. Big hill. It's in the indigenous mobs that live in that area. It's known as a healing centre. I didn't know that and any sort of thing about any of that at the time. I wasn't really that. I had a spiritual experience with the paddleboarding, but we've passed that. So anyway, so I wasn't in the best spot. And he goes, "We're going to go here." And he goes, "Mate, you're turning into a vegan for the weekend, and it's a dry bloody weekend." I'm like, "Oh God!" So no, and there's nothing wrong with vegans, but like for me, I'm a meat eater, so I'm like, "Oh, that was the worst possible scenario that of a weekend going away and then plus being dry, so there was no booze. And I'm like, "Oh, what are you doing to me, man? What's up with all this hocus pocus, man?" And I'm like, and he goes, nah, dude. I'm like, okay. And he goes, to do this, you need to focus on that. And you can't have those elements in there. I'm like, okay, that's probably, I could wrap that around my head. For us to do what I want to show you, you need to check that shit at the door, even if it's only temporarily, so we could focus on this. I said, okay, no worries. So we walked up, we did the sunrise up at the top of Mount Warning, and the few days before that it had been raining, so it was just really wet and tropical in that region, and there was a lot of water trickling down the hill and a few sort of creeks, natural cold bath creeks. And that was the first time he'd really sort of exposed me to cold immersion, because the water was fucking cold, man. And it was flowing, but it was in nature. I was like sort of found myself in this stream, wedged between a few rocks and this cold, and it was really good. And then he also then introduced me to some breathing, but I wasn't quite ready yet. And then he said, look, I've got this guy, his name's, he was at the start of his journey, and he discovered this guy named Wim Hof.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, he's big in breath work, and he was one of the big ones anyway. So because I started this one here, I've connected with him on one of his first courses here, my wife and I, but we paid for 2 courses. I can gift you one if you want, but you need to make me a promise. And I went, okay, well, what's this promise? He said, can you invest 10 minutes a day on yourself to do this for however the long course was, for a month? And I said, yeah, I'll do it. And that was in 2017. And so now breathwork's like just bigger than Benta, than the ice baths, but he was one of the first. And then now I became like one of their guinea pigs as they've built up their wellness business, amazing wellness business that they're doing. And so what they were learning, I'm like, okay, this is all this stuff. So, learning with Dr. Peter Litchfield, Dan Brule, Anthony Robbins, personal breathwork coach, and all these amazing beliefs, Dr. Belief, all these people, we've learned this stuff. And I'm like, oh, this breathwork really helps. And so what it did was gave me tools that I could implement on my own. It was free and free on my own. And so I didn't need to wait for the specialists at that time. So I now discovered that I had these tools that I could do in between my own appointments. And I'm like, wow, that was really empowering to be able to do that, because then it was under my control. And then so that was that first thing, the breathing and trying the mindfulness, and it took a long time. That course was brutal for me because my mind was always wandering, and there was no meds, there was no specialist. That was just me, myself, and I to do this work, which was quite difficult. But as I was doing it every day, it became a little bit easier. And you start off with small steps, Rosie, and move to the big ones. And then as time's gone by, my inquisitive nature, I'm like, okay, let's try, what's this mindfulness, or what's this yoga? How do I get into that? Oh, it's not yoga. I'm doing stretching. Right? It's just stretching. All right, yeah, okay, whatever.
I'm just doing
man.
some
Whatever
movement.
floats it. Yeah. So mobility and movement. Okay, it's not yoga, but a lot of that still stems with it. But I think where yoga differs is that connection of breath. There's other limbs than just the physical aspect, but I didn't discover that till later in the piece. And even with breathing, I started with breathing first, which is like a little bit along the track with yoga,
Yeah, it's amazing though, isn't it? Like once you start getting into it.
Oh yeah, it's and very transformative as well.
Yeah, 100%. And spiritual, like I'm not a spiritual person, or I'm not a religious person, sorry, I should say. But the spiritual side of things that just pop up along the way, during your practices, I find it quite amazing.
Absolutely. And I think, that's the whole thing about when people say there's the spiritual experience, and I'll speak to that because you just mentioned it.
Yeah.
I was never a spiritual person, and as a kid growing up, I'm not really that overly religious at all, really, just to tell you the truth. And some people are and some people aren't. For me, I didn't really sort of buy into that sort of the dogma, the whole thing. So for me, it didn't really work. As a kid, we were exposed to it quite often. but and that's fine. But I made that active choice. But when I started doing the paddle boarding, I signed up for this thing called the Molokai to Oahu. That was that first bit of growth, and that was the real first time I experienced anything that was spiritual in that sort of nature. Because when you do this, the race. I'll backtrack a sec. The race is an inter island race in Hawaii that covers the Kaiwi Channel, or Channel of Bones, second deepest trench in the world. And there was some really crazy weather and big waves that are going in. And this race for paddlecraft, or sort of boat, sort of paddlecraft, boats, boards, foils, all this sort of stuff, OC1s, canoes, is that you do this big downwinder, and it's an inter-island race. It's 32 miles or 50 plus kilometers across this channel. And before you do the race, they sort of get everyone, all the participants, in a big pool out. They call it a big circle, and they get you to lift a rock and say, this rock here, this is a token or your shell, throw it into the ocean and pray for something that's good. And when we say pray, it's not in a religious way, but this is just to pray for each other, that we have a safe crossing. But this energy, there was this energy that I couldn't explain, that gave me this feeling that I was going to be safe, right? Or something there that I couldn't explain. So that was that spiritual experience. And then when you do this big ass feat, right, whether it's running a marathon or something like that, when you complete it, that's another experience there. That's a spiritual experience, because it releases all in these endorphins. You've achieved something, and there's unexplainable that you experience as well. So that was that bit of the spirituality now that I've found with doing these other wellness practices, that it gives you, and it helps you be a little bit more grounded in the way that you think about things. It's about accepting the things that aren't explainable in a way, but that they work.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that sounds like an amazing experience in Hawaii to do that.
Oh, it was cool as.
Yeah. So from those first months, I guess, of your breathwork practice and practicing with Shane and Wim Hof, because he's in Noosa, isn't he?
No, Wim's, he's a Dutch dude. So he comes to us. He used to come to Australia quite a lot.
Yeah, right.
When they were sort of plugging his method. And then Shane and Angie worked with him on a lot of the stuff, but now he's got a lot of affiliates now, so I don't think he comes to Australia as much. But he's got a lot of people that are trained up in his style that'll host events and retreats now. That's why it's just... Besides him, and there's other people with the breath work now that are just doing a lot of the those modalities, which is great because people see the vision in it. Yeah. But when I first started a few years ago, and it was really still quite new to that space, it was just, you just do the breath work at home, you do it by yourself. And that's what I found for me was really empowering. I didn't need anyone to lead me through it. Yes, it's great that someone can do the bigger sessions, but I actually had to have that self-discipline to have those aha moments and all those gain those insights, and have those emotional releases that are associated with the breath work.
Yeah. So where's it led you to today? I know that you have your charity, Invisible Injuries. How has that come about?
Invisible Injuries was a great question. Was born out of our own personal situation and lived experience. So, they all kind of work in hand. They've been working in parallel with each other, Rosie. But when we moved to Noosa, as beautiful as it was, we were making things work. But one of the things was as well is when I did finally find specialist care, it was there, but I didn't really utilize it probably as much as what I did, because we tried to secure a home, and at that sort of particular point in time, they just announced the Royal Commission. So we'd secured this home. We're like, oh, fuck, now we got to try and get this loan. But everything kept on changing so quickly. So some unforeseen circumstances had happened where we'd secured this home and we had to change what we were doing so many times. So the focus was to try and just make ends meet, to try and hopefully secure this home that we were hoping to do. But what happened is, in the end, we couldn't secure it, and I was neglecting all my self-care, even the breathing, because I was just so tunnel focused on this work that I I pretty much dug myself into this hole where I was really, externally it's like this. Internally, I was falling apart, and I was probably at that worst stage that I was ever in. They were fleeting. I think if I didn't acknowledge that, there would have been some suicidal ideologies that had come and go. There was these things, but then there was like trying to find support when it wasn't there. It just went all downhill.
Yeah.
And then I found myself in this spot. So really the only thing that was there was the breathing that I was doing from Shane. So I sort of put it aside, then I really started hooking into that because that's what I could do at that time that was there for me. But then we lost this home and we were camping and in this bad spot with only really breathing to hook into. And it was at that time, from our own lived experience, we were camping, not by choice, at the back of a place called Kilkeven in the hinterland of the Sunshine Coast. Homeless because we'd been kicked out of the house, and when we were going to go back, it was this for sale sign. All of our shit was out. We had to pretty much do a pre-pack. So we were homeless, camping in Kilkeven, and that's when my wife was, I think we just need to run away. And I said, I'm not a runner, darling. I'm a fighter. I used to be at the top of my game in the military, and I'd rather have a fight than deal with it than run away. I'm not a runner. And anyway, so she's like, well, you know how to navigate your way. Why don't we document your story and then document how we could go about trying to find some ex-services organisations to sort of, then, you're not socially isolated, as well as find your specialists and then do all this self-care. And then maybe let's go and see what other people are doing. So that was the podcast piece. And then maybe we'll do a tour around that and see what's actually happening. Because at the time there was all these calls for Veteran Royal Commission into suicide. And so we're like, okay, well, let's do this. And as I dug down deeper, it's like, well, how do I do this? How do I find something that works for me? I want to do mental health. I don't want to just be like the volunteer. Amazing organisations there, but I'm not in that capacity to volunteer for another organisation yet. I just need to find something that'll work for us. So that was the birth of Invisible Injuries, where the first port of call was to really just set up the podcast to be able to share my story and other people's stories, because I'm not a clinician and I never professed to be. I've done a lot of studies into it now and qualified in certain bits, but that's not where, I'm not a clinician. I like to share my lived experience, and that's where we are with Invisible Injuries, is finding out, okay, well, this is lived experience, this is our guests' lived experience, or people that are in the organisation. This is how we could go in and we could tie in through collaborative efforts with other organisations that provide those services. So that was where Invisible Injuries came around. But also it was more about, okay, well, how do I find now? Discovered breathing, and then I discovered the mindfulness. And for me, I resonated with those things. When we were on tour and COVID had happened, I started looking into the yoga. I was like, oh, Tabata men's yoga challenge. I'm like, well, blokes don't do yoga. That's why I've been calling it stretching, right? And then as I've dived deeper, I'm like, actually, this is some serious shit with some dudes that are really, one, flexible, but they don't only just do this. They work out, they do these other bits. I'm like, okay, well, this is plausible. But then for me, I still had the stigma. So I'm like, I called it yoga in the dark for many years, even till pretty much, this signal came down again and said, you need to become a yoga teacher. So I was discovering this stuff, the breath work, the mindfulness, and I'm like, that shit works. It was shared to me by someone that's a veteran. I really trust what they're doing, and I'm seeing the benefits that it's having for even people in the first responder community and people outside the community. I'm like, well, this could really help with some mental health stuff or physical stuff. So how am I going to implement that into it now? There's other people that are in the fitness industry. I like my fitness, but that's not what I want to teach. And so I'm like, well, I'm discovering this for me. It works for me in my injuries. I can still work out, but I need to do something now. Like I can't be doing just workouts 5 days, 6 days a week, because my body's not going to handle that.
Yeah.
Plus the work that I was doing. So I'm like, okay, how do I do this? So I started discovering the yoga, and then as I'm like, I really enjoyed this. I've got the breathing aspects. I've got these other limbs, they call it, for the audience that are out there. They know the 8 limbs of yoga really contain a lot of other things. that you can start practicing on and off the mat besides the thoughts. And that for me resonated a lot more on that spiritual side, because it wasn't really overly religious, but I'm like, okay, if I live my life this way or have these values, I already had these values, but I'm like, I can implement it into something that I actually connect with a little bit more. And that's why I'm like, I know it works. So that's why I want to be able to impart those bits in. It's not about preaching the spirituality or those other limbs. They inherently come down the track. But I see now teaching the wellness methods is that there's aspects of each type of method that really have benefit and transformational effects for the people that I'm helping, Rosie. Yeah. So that's why I find it really important and so fulfilling to be able to do that. Even then, the times like we chatted about before the call that you think, oh, what the fuck am I doing this for? Yeah. But there's a light to the end of the tunnel in terms of the transformative effect and benefits that it can have.
Yeah, it really is. And I know and I know personally how transformative those practices can be. And we're both living proof of that. And to know, like, I know now that you're working with RSL Active over there. Are you getting some good results through that as well?
Oh, some amazing. Look, it started off slow. But now it's sort of picked up and it's close to where I am now. So I think that we've sort of we split test the timing and the people that are coming. So I've got a couple of guys that started off with the first beginner course and they've continued on and then stuck with it in the middle of the summer heat under the shade of a tree in the middle of the CBD, which was a great area to do it to where we are now. Working underneath our local sub-branch who's very proactive in being able to support an ex-services organisation. I'm part of the sub-branch, but they're there, the guys are coming down and the girls, and everyone's carrying some sort of injury or even a mental health thing. From what level, we don't go into too much because they've got their own. But what I've noticed is the shift in the mobility and flexibility and even mindset, incorporating other elements into it. So they've come so far now, and I'm really proud. And hopefully someone does listen from our chat that's part of our audience to this, because it's just really fulfilling to see them. They're moving better. Now we're up to this stage, Rosie, where I'm doing things that are flows. So now everyone knows their modification, and teaching beginners is very difficult, because everyone's and then especially when they're being trauma informed and also being physically injury aware, and making modifications is a big one. And so when you go to, like, if you have your own practice or go to a studio for regular practice, lots of people have been practicing for a while. So it can be, but when you've got the beginners and you see that transformative change where they're going, they're coming regularly, they're enjoying it, and you see them getting stronger and more flexible, that's just really rewarding.
Can I just ask you one question? The people that you have in your classes, you've now formed that community as well of people. And like, I don't know what stages they're at or anything like that, but for people that are dealing with a mental illness and even physical injuries, like we've talked about, it can be so isolating and you can feel really alone. So I can only even imagine, like, the flexibility aside and all the other benefits that they're getting from it, having a little sense of community can be so empowering.
Oh yeah. Oh, it totally is. And we have a good bit of banter there, and if there's someone new. So what I like about it is that people are slowly getting to know each other, whether they're part of the sub branch, because it's not just inclusive of our one sub branch. It's RSLWA. As if you're in the area and can make it. So this area I'd like to be able to go to several others, but it's just about delivering what we say we're going to deliver well first. And this community, we've got members that are coming in from different other RSL sub branches as well, and seeing that transformative effect and making the effort to come down. So that's the thing, is that once people are actually making an effort to come down and they're feeling welcome and safe in the space, they go, oh shit, actually I was really nervous about coming down here, but you did this flow and cued it in a way that I could understand the language. You offered modifications for my situation, and and, didn't meet, you know what I mean? So then there's these questions. I'll record it, then I'll post it afterwards. It's like, if you got any insights, hit me up afterwards, as you would in any yoga guidance. But it's like, they ask these questions and then they go back and do it, which is great, and then also they've got that resource of the online platform as well, Rosie.
Yeah, that's amazing. You're doing such great things over there. How are you going now? Like, have you created this space for yourself where you're able to go and do your yoga classes and run your charity and your podcast, but also keep on top of things as well as to not overwhelm yourself? Do you reckon you've got that dialed in now?
At this particular point in time, Rosie, yeah, I think I do. I
Yeah.
think I've got it dialed in now that one, I'm doing stuff that gives me purpose and I can still sustain a living. So I've got a couple of, I do DJing as well on the side as having my gold card and sort of like a bit of a defense pension as well. But and my collaboration efforts, and then I'm open with this because people sometimes go, oh, how the fuck do you make the money to be able to do this? And I think now for me, I'm not the type of person there that can be just stuck to a 9 to 5 same job. So and that's part of my personality is the different compartments and interests. So now if it gives me, I want to be able to help people and have that civic duty, but still do some stuff. That's where the yoga and the charity work comes in, and now I've got to be grateful that we're monetizing some stuff and that's part of it because as much as you want to try and offer it for free, it's not free to everyone. And that's something that I want to share with the audience there is that at the end of the day, someone's got to pay something somewhere, whether it's your time or whether it's these things. And that's where I've got to mention where, I'm just going to do a quick plug if that's all right. Where,
Yeah, 100%.
sort of we're a partner charity of an organisation. It's a for-profit with purpose organisation called Classics for a Cause. And so we're one of their charities that they donate money to, so then we can provide our offerings as well, besides the stuff with RSL Active, right? So we're a provider of services, and in this case is the wellness space of doing some stuff. And look, you're not in there here to make us $1 but at the same time, it also I need to put food on the table for my family,
Yeah,
which is
Yeah.
if you can't help, like they said, if you can't help stuff there, and how can you help anyone else? And I think that runs true from all that first. So that's one of the things there, and then in the best interests of transparency. But so we work with other organisations, and we've got that going on, Rosie.
Yeah, amazing. Andy, it's been such a joy to talk to you and hear your story and like just how you've moved through being in the Defence Force at such an elite level and your deployments and losing some friends and then coming out of that and navigating your life, really. It's not just your mental health, but your whole life with a wife and children, and to be where you are now, giving back to the community because that's what you're doing. And personally, like I found you through your podcast, and the title Invisible Injuries got to me straight away before I even listened to the first episode, because that's what it is. PTSD or any mental illness is, if you break your arm or a leg and people can see that you're broken, but with a mental health injury, it's really tough. And I think you're just doing amazing things. And I really want to thank you for that, because it's inspired me to start what I'm doing and my yoga and everything like that. I really resonate with a lot of the things that you're doing. I think we're both on very parallel paths, but I really want to thank you for coming on and sharing all of your stories with my listeners. And I know they're going to get so much out of it. If there's one thing that you could leave us with today for people that might be having a tough time and are struggling to navigate their mental health, do you have anything that you could say to them to help them along a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a few things, and thank you for asking me that question. So, to those people in your audience, for your audience, something that I'd like to share is that it's hard and it is painful. But when you take those steps in whatever way looks, so I'll reframe it. The steps that you take is for you. So not comparing up with the Joneses and doing so. Whatever steps that you take to improve your own situation, it's about you. and what works for you in your situation. It may take you several goes to find someone that you connect with from a specialist standpoint, but that's not the only way to be able to get help. So if you're seeking help and you're finding something, is take those stories. If there's something that you connect with someone, say in Rosie's podcast, right, that you go, okay, well, look, I can take these nuggets. You can then take what it is that you like from that and implement it in your own way, in your own thing, right? And if you're seeing the benefit of it, then who gives a shit about what Joe Blogs next to you or the Joneses are doing, because it's for your own growth, and it does take time. So these things all take time, and they only get easier, take the small steps and things will come in easier. It makes it easier as you learn to flex that muscle, so whether you're rehabilitating physically or mentally, the more you flex that muscle and actually deal with things, it has a massive transformational effect. Starting off small and doing things in small chunks will lead to bigger things. That's one thing, and consistency is one. So if you say you don't have enough time, then just do 1 minute a day. So 1 minute consistently, or whatever it is consistently, is better than just only once a week for a longer period. So you're setting habits, and you're not alone. So that's the thing, is that this whole mentality, I'm going to speak to if there's services out there and you're saying someone else needs it more than me, then that is the total incorrect way to think about it. If you are genuine about go and see something and you need it, then go and get it, right? You can quickly discern who's bullshitting or not, if they've got a different ulterior motive to be able to do something. But that's them, right? It's not you. So if you need help and you need to go and reach out for it and go and at least explore the option, and whether or not it's for you or not remains, that's a decision for you. And then lastly, just immediate support. That is massive. Immediate support, or finding your people that you can connect with. You don't even need to talk about mental health, but just that reduction in social isolation. You know what I mean, is massive, right? So there was more than one there, but I thought, that's just the opportunity to share it with the audience.
Yeah,
Rosie.
great. Thank you so much. And I totally like the social isolation thing. I think a lot of us, defense and first responders, and we seem to do that a lot, because I don't know if we're a little bit embarrassed, or we don't think that people understand what we're going through, or basically we just don't want to talk about it or acknowledge it. It's a big thing. So if you can, even your close networks, and like you said, you don't even have to talk about what's going on, but just be with other people. So important.
Oh, that's right. Well, there's an example of that. So just quickly, there's a program, and there's a few of the boys that I know, right? So it's like forging, right? So they go in and they make these old files, and there's a lot of first responders that are going in as well, because you go in. And it's not about talking about kumbaya. If you feel comfortable to do that, that's fine. Everyone's there and they're together, and they bash the shit out of these old files and repurpose them and make beautiful pieces of artwork of, like, the knives. They make real knives, real usable knives. But being there is a great mental health benefit there as well. So if you find an activity with people that you could go do stuff, you don't actually need to talk about your trauma. You're actually healing, having post-traumatic growth through going through something there with someone with a like-minded interest.
Wow, that's so cool. I didn't know about that one.
There's
so many people doing some good things.
Yes, and so are you, Rosie. So I wanted to be able to say thank you for all the work that you're doing, and for your community as well, over there on the East Coast. And I look forward to being able to collaborate with you again.
Yeah, thank you so much. And everything that you've mentioned, especially with invisible injuries, and you work with RSL Active over there, I'm going to link to all of that in the show notes, and people can find you. You are on Facebook. You're on Instagram as well?
Facebook and Instagram, and then our website. But if I can also ask, if we do have a YouTube channel. One of the things that I am trying to do, if you're in the audience and you want some exposure to some of the yoga that we're doing as well at the moment, is hit us up on the YouTube, hit the subscribe, and then once I've got 50, I'll be able to hopefully stream live as well. So that's what I'm looking at. I don't have heaps of followers, but if you build it, they will come. I'm
Yes.
confident of that. So
I believe so too, and we'll get you there. We'll get you to 50. Yeah, I'll link to
yeah,
that as well in the show notes, and
thank you.
everyone can go and have a look at what you're up to over there. But thank you so, so much. I really, really appreciate your time. I know it's a bit of a long one today, but it's so valuable. So thank you.
Thanks, Rosie. Thanks for having me.
I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. If you have, make sure to hit subscribe so you never miss any new ones. We release fresh content every Tuesday. And while you're there, take a moment to leave us a review. I would genuinely appreciate your thoughts. Don't forget to connect with me on Instagram and Facebook at Tactical Yoga Australia and share this episode with your friends, family and workmates to spread inspiration. Your support means the world. My name is Rosie Skeen. Join me again next week for another empowering and positive episode of Triumph Beyond Trauma. Until then, be kind to your mind and trust in the magic of your consistent and positive efforts. Triumph beyond your trauma is closer than you think. Have the best week.